Ah, you ready to travel back in time? Today I will take you to the birth of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. The story of a power that rose from the vast meadows of the steppes. This is not just a history of conquest, but a saga of perseverance, intelligence, and sometimes blood. Imagine, in the shadow of eagles soaring in the sky, in a world where the wind blows freely, a little boy is born. This child would reject the path that fate had set for him and write his own story. And his name would echo through the ages, Temujin, or a Genghis Khan. But, dear friends, this story is not just the story of one man. This is the story of the steppe, of tribes, of armies, and of a nation. So what made the Mongols different from others? What was the secret that made them not only warriors, but also master diplomats and strategists? And how did the world witness these small tribes unite and change the course of history? Today we will pursue these questions. Ah, dear listeners, I will now take you on a journey deep into the steppes. Close your eyes and imagine endless grasslands where the wind whispers like a song among the reeds. Here, in this land of harsh winters and scorching summers, a boy was born. His name was Temujin, but it was not just the name of a child, it was the beginning of a destiny that would change the course of history. Temujin was born in 1162, at a time when the Mongol tribes were torn apart by bloody conflicts. His father, Yasuge, was a powerful tribal leader, and in a move that would determine Temujin's fate, he betrothed his son to a girl from another tribe. But life on the steppe was not easy for anyone. When Temujin was only 9 years old, his father Yasuge was poisoned to death by his enemies. At that moment, young Temujin was burdened not only with his father's legacy, but also with the difficult burden of survival. After Yasuge's death, his tribe was weakened, and his enemies seized the opportunity. Temujin and his family were ostracized from their tribe and abandoned to the cruel nature of the steppe. His mother, Hualun, tried to keep her family together in these difficult days. She taught her children to hunt, to endure, and to resist the harsh rules of the steppe. Temujin learned from his mother not only to survive, but also to never give up in the face of adversity. But fate had not yet ended Temujin's trials. One day he was captured by an enemy tribe and taken prisoner. Heavy shackles were placed on his feet, making it impossible for him to escape. But Temujin showed that even iron chains could not break the love of freedom. One night, taking advantage of the watchman's carelessness, he managed to escape. This escape made him a stronger leader, not only physically but also spiritually. Temujin's youth was not only a struggle for survival, but also the seeds of his emergence as a leader. He was a man who would not give in to his enemies, made loyal friends, and always had big dreams for the future. He built a loyal core group around himself, and this small group grew into a structure that would lay the foundations for a large army that would unite the Mongol tribes over time. So, dear friends, do you wonder how Temujin went through these difficult paths to become Genghis Khan? What made him a unifying leader in a disorganized world where tribes were hostile to each other? Ah, my friends, the winds of the steppe once carried only the sound of chaos and conflict. The Mongol tribes looked upon each other with hostility and did not hesitate to spill blood as they laid claim to the vast grasslands. But one day, this vast land would be united under the banner of a single leader. That leader was not just the story of a man, but the story of the rebirth of a people. Temujin emerged from the hardships of his youth stronger. His family's ostracism, captivity, betrayal, all these things had kindled a fire in his soul. But fire is not only for burning, my friends, it is also for illumination and guidance. Temujin saw the disorganization of the tribes on the steppe and how it weakened them. The enemies were taking advantage of this division of the Mongols and expanding their territories by provoking conflicts between the tribes. Temujin was determined to change this fragmented structure. At the beginning, he had only a few loyal friends and family with him. But Temujin's leadership talent drew people to him. His vision was simple but powerful: the unity of the Mongols. This unity was not just a dream, but the only way to survive. As a leader, Temujin not only excelled on the battlefields, but also at the diplomatic table. He forged alliances with tribal leaders, impressing even powerful enemies with his intelligence. Of course, this was not easy. Some tribes saw Temujin's rise as a threat and united against him. But Temujin was a strategist who could anticipate his enemies' moves. He was known as much for his courage as a warrior as for his patience and determination as a leader. He not only defeated his enemies, he found a way to bind them to him. After a battle, he gave captured leaders a second chance and restored their lands to those who swore loyalty. This sense of justice increased trust in him and attracted more tribes to him. One of Temujin's greatest achievements was not only to unite the tribes, but also to establish a system of government that could sustain this unity. He created an order based on Mongol traditions but with innovative elements. Every tribe found a place in the new order. Equality was established between people. No one was superior to anyone else. The spoils of war were divided fairly, and the leaders accepted Temujin's authority without question. However, Temujin's unity was not only a physical union. He also united the hearts and minds of the Mongols. The new order was based on loyalty and trust. Each individual felt that under Temujin's leadership, he was serving a greater purpose. The fragmented voices of the steppe now became a single echo. We are Mongolia. So, my dear friends, what kind of an empire did Temujin's strength gain through this unity make him the founder of? What triumphs and challenges awaited him on this journey, from tribes to a nation, from a nation to an empire? Ah, my friends, now I will tell you about a time when the winds of the steppe carried the winds of the steppe to the ancient lands of China and moved mountains. The unity of the Mongols had been achieved. Temujin was no longer just the leader of the tribes, but the sole ruler of the entire steppe. But his dreams were not limited to the steppes. There was a bigger challenge on the horizon: China. The land of ancient civilizations, the land of riches and powerful dynasties. It was here that Temujin, or Genghis Khan as we now know him, set his sights. Chinese territory was then under the control of the Jin dynasty. The Jin dynasty despised the tribes of the steppe, seeing them only as a threat they could keep at the border. But Genghis Khan was a far cry from the old disorganized days of the Mongols. He now had a strong army, a loyal people, and, most importantly, an innovative strategy. The mistake of the Jin dynasty was to see this new Mongol power in the old light. They still saw the Mongols as nomadic herders and disorganized warriors. But Genghis Khan combined the discipline and warriorism of the steppe with an iron will and a sharp mind. The first attack was directed against the northern borders of the Jin dynasty. The Mongols moved like the wind, piercing the enemy's defenses. But this was not just an attack of brute force. Genghis Khan had a deep understanding of his enemy and analyzed China's weaknesses. The Jin dynasty had strong fortresses and large armies, but they were weakened by internal political strife. Moreover, the Mongols' unconventional war tactics caught the Jin army off guard. Genghis Khan's army, although outnumbered by his enemies, was distinguished by its superior mobility and discipline. The Mongols were a people who excelled on horseback. Every soldier was also an excellent archer and a fast cavalryman. The heavily armored armies of the Jin dynasty were overwhelmed by the hail of Mongol arrows. The Mongols skillfully used tactics of attrition and deception, luring the Jin armies into a trap with false retreats. Genghis Khan was a genius, not only on the battlefield, but also in strategic planning. One by one, he captured the northern strongholds of the Jin dynasty, cutting the enemy's logistical lines. Each victory boosted the morale of the Mongol army and weakened the power of the House of Jin. But Genghis Khan's real genius was to restore order in the lands he conquered. The Mongols went beyond plundering their conquered territories and set up systems to govern them. The Jin people found order under the harsh but fair rule of the Mongols. During these campaigns, the Mongols were not only warriors but also great strategic minds, as they utilized Chinese technology and know-how. The Mongols learned Chinese castle siege techniques and combined this knowledge with their own methods to develop new war machines. One by one, Jin fortresses fell before the might of Mongol catapults and siege towers. Eventually, the Mongols were able to take control of much of the northern lands of the Jin dynasty. This victory was not only a military success, but also a testament to Genghis Khan's leadership genius. The power of the Jin dynasty was shaken, and the gates of China were opened to the Mongols. But, my friends, these victories were only the beginning, because Genghis Khan's eyes were set on the whole of China and beyond. But how far would these first great Mongol victories take them? What obstacles would Genghis Khan face as he conquered the ancient cities and palaces of China? We will look for answers to these questions in the next episode. Get ready, because the rise of the Mongols is not over yet. Ah, my friends, I will now tell you how the harsh winds of the steppe blew into another ancient land. Genghis Khan's eyes had now shifted from east to west, focusing on the riches and strategic position of vast Central Asia. However, these lands were under the rule of the Khwarezm-Shahs, not an ordinary enemy. The Khwarezm-Shahs were one of the most powerful Islamic states of the time, and their ruler, Alauddin Muhammad, considered himself almost like an emperor. These two great powers were to face each other in an unforgettable struggle in history. It all started, my friends, with a trade caravan. Genghis Khan saw that the Mongols could now be strengthened not only by war but also by trade, and so he sought to establish friendly relations with the Khwarezm-Shah. A caravan of Mongol merchants set off for the Khwarezm-Shah lands. However, this caravan was looted on the orders of Alauddin Muhammad, and the merchants were killed. This was not just a trade dispute, but an open challenge to Genghis Khan. My friends, Genghis Khan's anger flared like the fire of the steppe, yet he did not act immediately. First, he tried diplomacy, sending an envoy to Alauddin Muhammad to seek a peaceful solution. But the Khwarezm-Shah ruler killed this envoy as well, sparking a war. At this point, Genghis Khan was on a path of no return. he would organize such a campaign that it would shake not only the Khwarezm Shah, but the whole of Central Asia. The Mongol army set out for Central Asia in 1219. Genghis Khan's preparation for this campaign was another example of his military genius. He divided his army into 3 main columns, and each column marched in a different direction, bewildering the enemy. The speed and flexibility of the Mongols gave them a great advantage over the heavy and unwieldy armies of the Khwarezm Shahs. Alauddin Muhammad had not expected to fight on such a broad front. As their cities fell one by one, he realized that the Mongols were not only using brute force, but also clever tactics. Samarkand was one of the most important cities of the Khwarezm Shahs. Genghis Khan organized a great siege to capture this city. The Mongols gained the upper hand not only with their cavalry, but also with the siege techniques they had learned from China. Catapults, siege towers, and war machines destroyed Samarkand's strong walls. When the city fell, the Mongols had not only won a military victory, but it had a psychological impact on the peoples of Central Asia. Everyone now understood that the Mongols were an unstoppable force. And Alauddin Muhammad did not know what to do in the face of these defeats. Realizing he could not withstand the speed and power of the Mongols, he fled eastward. But my friends, Genghis Khan would never forgive his enemy. The Mongols pursued Alauddin Muhammad and captured him in the middle of a desert. There, in solitude and despair, the monarch breathed his last. By the end of this campaign, the Mongols controlled not only the Khwarezm Shahs, but the whole of Central Asia. But these victories were only the beginning. Genghis Khan had established a new order in these lands, connecting peoples through trade and culture. The great cities of Central Asia were being reshaped under Mongol rule. But my friends, after these great victories, Genghis Khan's eyes would turn even further west. And how would the Mongol advance lead to a confrontation with the other great powers of the Islamic world? Get ready, because this story is not over yet. My dear friends, I will now tell you the secrets of the great army that rose from the vastness of the steppe. Genghis Khan's army was not only a machine of war, but also a product of genius. Without understanding this army, you cannot comprehend how the Mongol Empire was able to shake the world. Although the power of their swords and arrows is etched in the dusty pages of history, you should know that behind this power lies discipline, intelligence, and organization. Genghis Khan's army was molded by the nature of the steppe. Every single soldier had been accustomed to life on horseback from childhood, and had made the use of the bow and arrow a way of life. But my friends, these skills alone were not enough. In putting together his army, Genghis Khan needed not only strong warriors, but also obedient and disciplined soldiers. This is why the discipline at the heart of the Mongol army set it apart from all other armies. Genghis Khan built his army on the 10-man system. Every 10 soldiers formed a unit, which grew to hundreds, thousands, and finally tens of thousands. This system not only ensured an organized chain of command, but also made each soldier part of a whole. No soldier could shirk his duty, because each unit was dependent on every other. On the battlefield, it would work like a machine, tearing through the enemy ranks without the slightest hitch. But my dear friends, the strength of the Mongol army was not only in numbers or discipline. Their battle tactics were so clever as to render their enemies helpless. The Mongols were known for their flexibility and speed on the battlefield. They would fake retreats to tire their enemies, lure them into a trap, and counterattack when least expected. This tactic of feigned retreat left their enemies in disarray and allowed the Mongol cavalry to surround them. My friends, Perhaps the greatest strength of the Mongol army was its success in logistics. An army survives not only by its skill on the battlefield, but also by its ability to feed and move itself. The Mongols were unique in this regard. Every soldier moved on horseback, using several horses at once to cover long distances without tiring. These horses were the hardy creatures of the steppe and gave the Mongol soldiers speed. Moreover, the Mongols always carried their own food and could advance without depending on local resources. Genghis Khan also understood the importance of intelligence. Before going to war, he would send spies to scout enemy territory and learn the weak points of the enemy armies. Knowing who his enemies were, how they fought, and what resources they had, gave Genghis Khan a great advantage. That is why the Mongol army won victories not only by brute force, but also by clever planning. Then, my friends, there was another secret behind the success of the Mongol army: ruthlessness. Genghis Khan made it a strategy to strike fear into his enemies. Cities that resisted would meet the cruel face of the Mongol sword, but those that surrendered were usually spared. This method demoralized their enemies, forced them to surrender, and facilitated the Mongol victory. This immense power and strategy made the Mongols not just an army of conquerors, but one of the most effective military forces in history. But my friends, who could stand in the way of this fearsome army? And how far would Genghis Khan go with his immense power? Get ready, because our story is not over yet. Ah, my friends. Now I will take you with the wind of history to the cold and harsh lands of the West. This time the steel will of the steppe turned its eyes to the vast forests of Russia and the craggy mountains of the Caucasus. The descendants of Genghis Khan, like a fierce wind from the east, were determined to sweep away everything in their path. But this land was not like the open horizons of the steppe, nor the orderly cities of China. Here, nature and man were being tested with another harshness. The first step of the Mongols into Russia was taken in 1223 near the Kalka River. At that time, the Russian principalities were independent, fragmented, small states. Lacking unity, these principalities were not strong enough to withstand the Mongol whirlwind. Genghis Khan's generals, especially Subutai and Jebe, embarked on a great expedition to explore the Russian lands and prepare the ground for conquest. They encountered a combined Russian and Kipchak army at the Kalka River, which they trapped with a clever tactic. By feigning a false retreat, the Mongols dragged their enemies after them and eventually completely encircled and destroyed them. This victory announced the power and ruthlessness of the Mongols throughout the region. But my friends, what happened at the Kalka River was only the beginning. The real storm came after the death of Genghis Khan. In 1237, a huge Mongol army led by Genghis Khan's grandson Batu Khan marched again into Russia. Batu Khan took with him one of the steppe's most skillful commanders, Subutai. This expedition was not just an exploration but a conquest. One by one, the Mongols brought the Russian principalities to their knees, each trying to protect its own small kingdom. Cities like Ryazan, Vladimir, Suzdal were devastated by Mongol fire. The Mongols' success in this campaign was due not only to their military might, but also to their ability to adapt to the harsh winter conditions. My friends, you know the harsh Russian winters, snow-covered roads, freezing cold, and impassable rivers. But the Mongols turned these difficulties to their advantage. The frozen rivers became natural paths for the Mongol army, These warriors on horseback crossed frozen rivers and attacked where their enemies least expected it, moving quickly and unseen and crossing the river lattice, the challenge to their strength. The Mongols did not stop at Russia. To the south, they turned to the steep and impassable mountains of the Caucasus. This region was not only characterized by its geographical difficulties, but also by its diverse cultures and peoples. The peoples they encountered in the Caucasus, such as the Alans and Circassians, tried to resist the Mongol power. However, the Mongols quickly and ruthlessly crushed these resistances as well. The Caucasus went down in history as another conquest victory of the Mongol Empire. My friends, the Mongols' dominance in Russia and the Caucasus was not limited to their success on the battlefield. They established their own system of governance in these regions and established a long-lasting control. The Russian principalities were forced to pay taxes to the Mongols, and these lands became part of the Mongol state called the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde ruled in these lands for a long time, both by controlling the trade routes and by establishing an effective rule over the peoples of the region. But my friends, this westward incursion of the Mongols had also opened the gates of Europe. So what did the Mongols have planned against this new land? And how would Europe respond to this hurricane from the east? We will look for answers to these questions in the next episode. Get ready, because the Mongolian storm is not over yet. Ah, my dear friends, this time the hoofbeats of the Mongol horses are reaching the gates of Europe. Never before has the Western world faced such a threat as these invincible warriors of the steppe advance, strong and unstoppable as the wind from the east. Their leader, Batu Khan, was a descendant of Genghis Khan, determined to continue his grandfather's legacy and expand the borders of the Mongol Empire. His name would echo across Europe with fear and admiration. But the beginning of this story, my friends, was not just a conquest, but a masterpiece of Mongol military genius and strategy. Beginning in 1237, the Great Campaign opened with the conquest of Russia. Batu Khan, with a master commander like Subutai at his side, led the Mongol army into the heart of Europe. Their goal was not only to gain territory, but also to show the world the power and superiority of the Mongol Empire. After their victories in the snow-covered lands of Russia, the Mongols set their sights on the fertile lands and rich cities of Eastern Europe. These regions, stretching from Poland to Hungary, were the next target of the Mongol war machine. By 1241, the Mongols decided to attack Europe by opening two major fronts. The first army headed for Polish territory. Cities like Krakow and Wrocław were devastated by Mongol fire. At the Battle of Legnica, a united European army met the Mongols. However, my friends, the Mongols, led by Subutai, once again outsmarted their enemies with a clever tactic. The European army disintegrated under a hail of Mongol arrows. This victory reminded the Western world once again what a dangerous force the Mongols were. But the real blow was to be struck in the south, in Hungarian territory. Batu Khan marched with most of his army to the plain of Mohawk. In April 1241, they faced the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohawk. This powerful kingdom of Europe tried to resist the Mongols. However, the Hungarian army was quickly defeated by Mongol tactics, discipline, and speed. The Mongols showed their superiority not only on the battlefield, but also in logistics. For them, the rivers became a passage, not an obstacle. The mountains were simply heights to be overcome. After their victory, the Mongols advanced deep into Hungary. Budan, today Budapest, was one of the cities that felt the might of the Mongol armies. The people fled in fear and took refuge in the mountains and forests. But the Mongols were not only conquering, they were also beginning to govern their conquered lands in an orderly manner. At this point, the foundations of the Golden Horde were laid. Batu Khan established Mongol rule in the conquered lands, making this region both a control center for trade routes and a power base. The Golden Horde was to be not only a military administration, but also a cultural and economic center. The Golden Horde covered a vast territory, stretching from the steppes north of the Black Sea to the interior of Eastern Europe. In organizing this new state, Batu Khan integrated the local peoples into the Mongol order. An ingenious system of taxation, security of trade routes, and control of local governments was established. By controlling the trade routes, the Mongols increased the wealth of the region and made these lands an important stop on the Silk Road. My friends, the Golden Horde became one of the most powerful branches of the Mongol Empire and maintained its influence in these lands for centuries. But Batu Khan always had bigger goals in mind. He wanted to go deep into Europe and carry the Mongol power to the heart of the West. But would Batu Khan's dreams ever come true? Would the Mongols be able to subjugate the rest of Europe? Let's look for the answers to these questions together in the next episode. Get ready, because the Mongolian storm is still raging. My dear friends, I will now tell you about one of the most glorious and yet thorny pages of Mongolian history. Kublai Khan's conquest of China and the founding of the Yuan dynasty is the story not only of a military victory, but also of a period of intersection of cultures, ideologies, and concepts of governance. This was no ordinary conquest, but an event that radically changed world history. The warrior children of the Mongol steppes were poised to rule China, one of the world's greatest civilizations. But the road was paved with uphill battles, clever strategies, and great vision. Kublai Khan was a leader who inherited the legacy of his grandfather Genghis Khan. But his eyes were not only on the riches beyond the steppes, but also on China's deep cultural heritage and system of governance. When Kublai was proclaimed Great Khan in 1260, much of China's territory was still under the control of the Song dynasty. In the fertile lands of the south, the Song had built one of the most advanced civilizations in the world at that time. Kublai's goal was not only to conquer these lands, but also to unite this civilization under Mongol rule. However, my dear friends, this was not an easy task. The Song dynasty had a strong defense line, rich resources, and a resilient popular will. To achieve this great goal, Kublai Khan relied not only on his strength on the battlefield, but also on his intelligence and diplomatic skills. His first step was to consolidate Mongol control of northern China by moving his capital to Dadu, where Beijing is today. He put a Mongol stamp on the heart of China. Dadu was not only an administrative center, but also a crossroads where Mongol and Chinese cultures came together. Here, Kublai learned the ancient Chinese bureaucratic system, while taking care to preserve Mongol traditions. In 1268, Kublai launched a major campaign against the Song dynasty. It was not only a military campaign, but also a test of the Mongol army's logistical and engineering skills. The Song held out in strong walled cities and in areas protected by rivers, but Kublai was a patient and decisive leader. The Mongol armies developed new tactics to adapt to China's complex geography. They built huge bridges to cross rivers and giant catapults designed by Chinese engineers for use in siege warfare. This proved once again that the Mongols were not only warriors, but also great strategists. By 1276, Hangzhou, the capital of the Song dynasty, fell. this was a great victory for the Mongols. But the Song dynasty's resistance did not end there. There were still small pockets of resistance in the southern regions. In 1279, Kublai struck a final blow to break this resistance for good. The Battle of the Yamen Sea near Guangdong was a turning point, in which the last remnants of the Song dynasty were destroyed. This victory, the entire Chinese territory came under Mongol rule. Kublai Khan was not content with conquering China. In 1271, he established the Yuan dynasty and began to rule China under a Mongol dynasty. The Yuan dynasty incorporated not only Mongolian traditions, but also China's ancient understanding of governance. Kublai adopted China's complex bureaucratic structure, worked with Confucian scholars, and promoted agriculture and trade to win popular support. Under his rule, China became one of the centers of the Silk Road and enjoyed a golden age of international trade. But dear friends, alongside these great achievements, there were also growing problems within the Yuan dynasty. Cultural differences between the Mongols and the Chinese, difficulties in governance and economic woes would eventually weaken the dynasty. So what would be the fate of the Yuan dynasty after Kublai Khan? How would the Mongols continue to rule this vast civilization? In the next episode, we will look for answers to these questions together. Get ready, because this story from the depths of China is not over yet. Ah, my dear friends, let us take another journey into the depths of the centuries. This time, we will follow in the footsteps of Hulagu Khan, one of the reckless leaders of the Mongols. We are going to a time when Baghdad, the Pearl of the East, the capital of knowledge and wisdom, is witnessing one of the most dramatic moments in history. Hulagu Khan was one of Genghis Khan's grandsons. Like his grandfather, he was a leader with a passion for conquest. But he was destined to push the gates of ancient civilizations, not just the steppes. Hulagu's rise began at the behest of his uncle, the great Khan Mongke. Mongke had ordered him to march towards the Islamic world and establish Mongol rule in these lands. With this order, Hulagu left the steppes of Central Asia and set off with a huge army. It is said that the number of soldiers under his command reached 100,000. Each of them was an invincible warrior who had mastered the Mongolian art of war. However, Hulagu's journey was not only a military expedition. He was also embarking on an adventure of strategy and diplomacy. Baghdad, Baghdad. At that time, it was the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. Under the rule of Caliph Mustasim, this city was one of the most important cultural and commercial centers of the Islamic world. However, in those days, the Abbasid Caliphate had lost its former glory, and its power and authority had weakened. It did not take long for Hulagu to realize this opportunity. First, he gained power in Iranian territory, taking control of local emirates and fortresses one by one. Then he set his sights on Baghdad. Hulagu's march on Baghdad was not just the movement of an army. It was like the approach of destiny towards the city. The Mongols crossed the Tigris River and stood at the gates of the city. Caliph Mustasim was slow to take this threat seriously. In fact, perhaps he underestimated the power of the Mongols, or believed that their ancient libraries and magnificent palaces would protect them. However, neither fascinating books nor centuries of cultural heritage were strong enough to stop the armies of Hulagu Khan. When the Mongols laid siege to the city, the people of Baghdad were in a panic. The clouds of dust rising from beyond the city walls seemed to herald death and destruction. The siege lasted only a few days, as the Abbasid defenses soon collapsed in the face of the Mongol army's superior engineering know-how and fighting techniques. In February 1258, the gates of Baghdad were opened to Hulaga's soldiers. The fall of Baghdad turned into one of the most tragic scenes in history. The city was looted and burned. The ancient Tigris River was filled with books discarded from the caliph's magnificent libraries. It is said that the water of the river turned the color of ink for days, and then blood red. The end of Caliph Mustafa was as sad as Baghdad. Hulagu had him killed and ended the Abbasid Caliphate. So thus this dynasty, which had been the symbol of the Islamic world for over 500 years, disappeared from the stage of history. But Hulagu's story did not end there. He established the Ilkhanid Empire in the lands he conquered. This state, as part of the Mongol Empire, ruled Iran and the surrounding lands for many years. In laying the foundations of this new state, Hulagu relied not only on his sword, but also on his administrative skills. The Ilkhanids developed a system of governance based on both Mongol warriorism and the rich culture of the local population. Dear friends, think about it now. The fall of Baghdad changed history. But this change was not limited to destruction and death. What kind of civilization did the Ilkhanids build in the wake of this destruction? How did Hulagu's legacy shape the future Islamic world and world history? These are the questions that will lead us to our next story. Ah, my dear friends, now we are sailing towards another story that blows like the wind across the Mongolian lands. This time, we do not have the clatter of swords and the triumphant shouts of armies, but the footsteps of merchants echoing along the trade routes, the excited conversations rising from the bazaars, and the dance of cultural riches from all over the world. This is a story of a great transformation in which the Mongol Empire reshaped with culture and economy the lands it had won by the sword. Mongols, remembering them only for their conquests is like seeing only the roots of a giant tree. Indeed, this gigantic empire founded by Genghis Khan and his descendants was as deep in mind as it was sharp in sword. From the vast steppes of East Asia to the gates of Europe, this empire brought order to a land that is unparalleled in history. This order is called Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. And what was this peace, you ask? Ah, my dear friends, that peace was a life energy that was revived on ancient trade routes like the Silk Road. The Silk Road, one of the oldest and most important trade routes in human history. It started in China, crossed the vast lands of Central Asia, passed through Persia, and eventually reached Europe. However, the Mongols did not just see it as a trade route. They rebuilt it as the artery, the lifeblood of their empire. Genghis Khan's descendants established complete control over the Silk Road. Mongol power removed barriers to trade while protecting merchants from the threat of pirates and bandits. Everything in the Mongol Empire seemed to be organized to ensure safe trade. Along the way, there were lodging points, caravanserais, and guard posts. It is said that a merchant could set out from China and transport his goods carefree all the way to the shores of the Mediterranean. Trade is a journey not only of goods but also of ideas, isn't it? Ah, my dear friends, it was during this period that the worlds came closer together. It was not only silk and spices that traveled from China to Europe, but also technologies such as paper making and gunpowder, medical knowledge and artistic insights. Imagine, while travelers like Marco Polo brought the splendor of Mongolian palaces to Europe, the elegance of Chinese porcelain reached the tables of nobles in the West. The Mongols were a bridge that not only carried but also blended cultures and technologies. Particularly, Mongol leaders also appreciated this cultural richness. Rulers like Kublai Khan were open to different religions, arts, and sciences. Their palaces overflowed with sages, scholars, and artists from around the world. The Mongol Empire created a unique civilization by integrating the wisdom of conquered peoples into its rule. For example, Arab mathematicians and Chinese astronomers worked together to make groundbreaking advances in science. This multicultural approach to governance enabled the Mongols to build a civilization that shaped world history, rather than just being a military power. Economically, the Mongols also had a great impact. As caravans laden with gold, silver, and precious stones moved along the Silk Road, this trade revitalized the cities. To encourage trade, the Mongols imposed low taxes and granted special privileges to merchants. This created an economic boom within the borders of their empire. In fact, during this period, trade on the Silk Road experienced one of its heyday compared to previous eras. But my dear friends, these great achievements came at a price. All this movement brought not only wealth and culture, but also disease. The plague, known as the Black Death, spread rapidly along the Silk Road, killing millions of people around the world. The cultural and economic legacy of the Mongol Empire is a story intertwined with such complex elements. But now think about it. Did the Mongol peace really deserve all this greatness? And could this peace make us completely forget the destructiveness of the conquests? In the next chapter, we will take a closer look at the collapse of the Mongol Empire and the traces it left in history. Are you ready? My dear friends, I now take you to the vastness of the Mongolian lands, but this time we will witness a different face. The mighty empire that Genghis Khan once brought together with an iron fist will begin to crack like a stormy sky. Genghis Khan rose from the steppes to create a vast empire. But when he left the world, he left behind not only a legacy, but also a question mark. Who was going to rule such a vast empire, and how? Genghis Khan died in 1227. Even the wind that blew across the steppe that day seemed to mourn. The Khan's most loyal men set out to bury his body, where no one would ever find it. Rumor has it that everyone they met on the way was silently killed to protect the secret of his tomb. That tomb is still shadowed in the history books as a mystery that cannot be found. But the great mystery, my dear friends, was what would happen after him, because the Mongol Empire was held together not only by conquest, but also by the personal leadership of Genghis Khan. After the death of the Khan, the empire was entrusted to his 4 sons and grandsons. However, this entrustment would eventually bring not unity but separation, because in the Mongolian steppe tradition, land was seen as the personal property of a ruler. In accordance with this tradition, Genghis Khan divided his empire among his sons. My dear friends, this was the moment when the invisible threads that held together a huge empire began to unravel. The division took the form of 4 great khanates. In the east, in the territory that could be considered the heart of the Mongol Empire, the Great Khanate, or Yuan dynasty, was established. This dynasty ruled the glorious lands of China and was considered the center of the Mongol dynasty. Leaders like Kublai Khan blended Chinese culture with Mongol traditions. However, this Khanate, more than the others, would move closer to China and away from the Mongol Empire. Moving westward, we find the Chagatai Khanate. This Khanate, which ruled the vast steppes of Central Asia, was one of the most loyal custodians of Mongol traditions. However, my dear friends, do not forget that this loyalty would eventually be transformed by the strong influence of Islam in these lands. This led to a different cultural and political structure of the Chagatai Khanate. Moving further west, we reach the territory of the Golden Horde Khanate. This Khanate, which covered a large part of today's Russia, not only carried the warrior spirit of the steppe, but also had a great influence on the Slavic peoples. However, here too, rather than Mongol unity, the cultural influences of local peoples began to be felt more and more. Finally, in the southwest, we come across the Ilkhanids. This Khanate, which covered what is today Iran, Iraq, and its environs, was deeply rooted in the Islamic geography. The Ilkhanids carried the legacy of Hulagu Khan, who brought the Abbasid Caliphate to an end. However, their internal struggles and their interaction with Islam set the Khanate on a unique path. Ah, my dear friends, this is how these scattered Khanates tore apart the great empire that was once held together by the iron will of Genghis Khan. Each one of them has carved out its own destiny, created its own cultural and political dynamics. But in the shadow of this division, there was another truth. Separation breeds weakness. The Mongol Empire ceased to be a single power, making it more vulnerable to external attacks and internal conflicts. Well, my friends, would you like to see the tumultuous years that followed this division, when the Khanates became rivals? And in those years, to watch more closely the steps of the Mongol world towards collapse. So our story will continue. Are you ready? Ah, my dear friends, the story of the Mongols, who once shook the world with the melody of the steppes, is now trying to shine with a last spark. That glorious empire that once shook the world from east to west, north to south, is now slowly dying out like a candle. But the echoes of that end still have much to tell us before they disappear from the stage of history. The seeds of weakening were sown when the colossal structure built by Genghis Khan was divided among his sons and grandsons. The four great Khanates, the Yuan dynasty, the Chagatai Khanate, the Golden Horde Khanate, and the Ilkhanate, gradually broke away from each other and began to forge their own paths. But my dear friends, the separation was only the beginning. The real danger was the internal turmoil these Khanates faced. The rival Khanates were struggling not only with external enemies, but also with internal divisions. The fall of the Yuan dynasty was the first major sign of the disintegration of the Mongol Empire. Gone were the days when Kublai Khan sat on the throne of China, and the Mongols were slowly melting into Chinese culture. The Yuan dynasty was struggling to govern even its own people. The rebellions of Chinese peasants and the rise of the Ming dynasty erased the Yuan from the stage of history. That glorious capital, Beijing, was no longer in the hands of the Mongols, but of the Ming. We turn west, we see the fall of the Golden Horde Khanate. Ah, my dear friends, the story of the Golden Horde is perhaps the most tragic. This Khanate had a wide influence on the lands of the Slavic peoples, and even paved the way for the formation of the Russian states. But Timur's hard fist cracked the foundation of the Golden Horde. Internal turmoil, struggles for the throne, and the rise of the Russian Nezliks made the Golden Horde's days numbered. Over time, this powerful Khanate disintegrated into a handful of small states and quietly disappeared from the stage of history. The Chagatai Khanate tells a different story. This Khanate, which ruled over the vast steppes of Central Asia, was changed and transformed by the influence of Islam. But, dear friends, change is not always a source of strength. The Chagatai Khanate, while culturally enriched, was also plunged into divisions and struggles for the throne. The rise of Timur marked the end of an era in the Chagatai lands. Timur carried the legacy of the Chagatai Khanate on a different path, but it was far from the glorious past of the Mongols. And finally, the Ilkhanates. The Ilkhanates had risen with the bloody conquests of Hulagu Khan and settled in the heart of the Islamic geography. But their days were numbered too. Internal strife, economic difficulties, and the shadow of Timur weakened the Ilkhanates. Eventually, this Khanate, like the others, disappeared into the depths of history. Dear friends, the weakening of the Mongols was not limited to the collapse of the Khanates. The great military discipline established by Genghis Khan had given way to wealth and complacency. The first Mongols were warriors who experienced the harshness of the steppe. But as generations passed, this hardness gave way to softness. As the Mongols adapted to the cultures of the lands they conquered, they lost their own identity. This has turned the once mighty empire that once shook the world into a weak shadow. Finally, my dear friends, the Mongol Empire disappeared from the stage of history. But the legacy they left behind is still felt like the echoes of that great storm. Trade routes around the world, cultural interactions, and even some systems of governance bear the imprint of the Mongols. But I can't help but ask, has the legacy of Genghis Khan really been completely erased? Or could the name of that great leader still echo somewhere in the steppe winds? Well, my dear friends, we will continue to dive into the depths of history to find the answer to this question. Are you ready? My dear friends, the history of the Mongols was as bright as lightning and as powerful as a storm. But this lightning and storm did not just come and go in an instant. Their impact was felt in waves for centuries. The Mongols not only conquered territories, but also left indelible marks on world history, marks that we still hear echoes of in many corners of the modern world. Today, we will explore the legacy of this great empire together. Are you ready? The Mongols, united under the leadership of Genghis Khan, are known for their military genius. But this genius was not limited to success on the battlefield. They innovated so much in strategy and organization that their enemies tried to imitate their methods rather than stop them. The Mongols took the art of war to a new level. My dear friends, think about it. Hundreds of thousands of horsemen were like a flood, moving independently of each other, but as if toward the same goal. This was not only a feat of courage, but also of extraordinary discipline. The Mongol army was distinguished from all other armies by the speed and accuracy of its communications. For example, there was the famous Yam system. When a message or an order needed to reach a place thousands of kilometers away, the Mongolian postal system was activated. This system consisted of riders stationed along the roads and always on standby. Each one would pass a message to the next, carrying the information almost as fast as the wind. My dear friends, this was a revolution, not only in terms of military victories, but also in terms of trade and administration. As for their political legacy, the Mongols' approach to governance was characterized by an unprecedented flexibility and pragmatism. Instead of destroying the traditions and beliefs of conquered peoples, they often embraced them. Genghis Khan found a way to govern his vast empire peacefully by allowing peoples to retain their own rulers and religious leaders. In this way, different cultures learned to live together in the lands dominated by the Mongols, building a bridge between the Islamic world, China, Europe, and Central Asia. The Mongols accelerated the interaction between these regions, Another remarkable legacy of the Mongols lay in their understanding of law. The laws of Genghis Khan were a set of rules developed to ensure justice and order. Ah, my dear friends, these rules applied not only to Mongol soldiers and their people, but also to the inhabitants of the conquered lands. Offenses such as theft, lying, and treason were punished severely, but also the rewarding of talented individuals and the protection of the rights of the people were part of these laws. As for cultural heritage, the influence of the Mongols was dazzling. Control over the Silk Road not only stimulated trade, but also allowed ideas, technologies, and art to move from west to east and east to west. The Mongols made it possible for many cultures to interact. For example, the Mongols were instrumental in bringing Chinese gunpowder and the printing press to Europe. Similarly, the scientific and philosophical knowledge of the Islamic world spread to a wider audience in the lands under Mongol rule. The legacy of the Mongols also shaped the governance of many governments. Their practices in areas such as centralized administration, tax systems, and control of trade routes inspired many later states. For example, the autocratic rule in Russia was shaped by the influence of the Golden Horde. In China, the traces left by the Yuan dynasty were felt even in the Ming and Qing periods. My dear friends, the impact of the Mongols on world history shows that they were not just warriors. They built much more than an empire. They built a world order. But I can't help but ask, while this legacy keeps the Mongols' name alive in legends and history books, does it allow us to still feel their spirit in our modern world? Let's dig a little deeper to discover the answer to this question. Are you ready? Ah, my dear friends, the traces of the Mongols have not only remained in the pages of history, their influence is still deeply felt in today's world. The legacy of their empire resonates from our modern borders to our cultural habits and even our understanding of history. Now I will tell you about the impact of this great people throughout the ages. Together, let us examine how this light that shines in the shadows of the past is taking shape today. The vast territories of the Mongols played an important role in shaping today's borders. Oh, think of it, my dear friends. An empire stretching from the vast steppes of Asia to the interior of Europe. The Mongol Khanates had established a deep-rooted political order in the regions they ruled. In particular, the dominance of the Golden Horde greatly influenced Russia's understanding of centralized government and territorial policies. The vast borders and strong state structure of today's Russia can be traced back to the Golden Horde period. Similarly, the Yuan dynasty in China brought with it many of the elements that shaped the cultural and political identity of modern China. Many of the systems that allowed China to continue as a unified state took root during the period of Mongol rule. But their influence was not limited to borders, my dear friends. The Mongols served as a bridge for the interaction of different cultures. Control over the Silk Road enabled the transportation of not only goods between the West and the East, but also ideas, technologies, and beliefs. Under Mongol rule, China's gunpowder and printing press spread Europe, and Central Asia's astronomy and mathematics spread around the world. Many of the basic concepts we have today in science and technology were developed thanks to these Mongolian interactions. Oh, think about it. Perhaps the foundations of our modern world rest on the ability of this great people to bring cultures together. The impact of the Mongols on our understanding of history is perhaps the most profound. Their achievements and destructions have always been a matter of curiosity for historians. The Mongols' conquests were not only seen as military successes, but also as demonstrations of their ability to build empires, develop the art of governance, and encourage cultural interaction. Today, the period referred to in history books as the Mongol peace is considered a rare period of harmony and trade boom in world history. It was a golden age, to which not only the Mongols contributed, but also the peoples united under their rule. If we look at their cultural influence, the Mongolian way of life and traditions are still present in many societies. In particular, the tent culture of Central Asia is part of the Mongol heritage. The sense of freedom that comes with a life on horseback is embedded in the psyche of today's steppe peoples. The influence of Mongolian cuisine and martial arts can be seen in modern Asian cultures. Moreover, the religious tolerance of the Mongols is an important example that shows us that an order in which different faiths can live together is possible. Dear friends, perhaps the greatest legacy of the Mongols to the modern world is what they remind us of: the power of cultural exchange, harmony, and innovation. They may be remembered as a people whose conquests inspired fear, but the order they left behind built a world of creativity and interaction. When you look at the world map today, when you think about the advances in science and art, remember how the Mongols contributed to this progress. But my dear friends, now I would like to ask you this question. Once we understand the deep and lasting impact of the Mongols, what is the real lesson we should learn from history? Perhaps finding the answer to this question will be the way in which we can draw the light of the future from the shadows of the past. Perhaps this lesson is the most important secret that history whispers to us. Dream, my dear friends, dream, and let's meet again in our next story.